Avdi, you have actually made it impossible for me to write my own freaking name. I probably 20% of the time when I'm typing, I will sign my emails as Davdi instead of David.
It's okay. We love you, Davdi. This episode is sponsored by Rackspace. Are you looking for a place to host your latest creation? Want terrific support, high performance, all backed by the largest open source cloud? What if you could try it for free? Try out Rackspace at rubyrogues.com/Rackspace and get a $300 credit over 6 months. That's $50 per month at rubyrogues.com/Rackspace. Snap is a hosted CI and continuous delivery service that goes far beyond letting you do continuous deployment. Snap's first-class support for deployment pipelines lets you push any healthy build to multiple environments automatically and on demand. This means with Snap, you can deploy your staging environment today, verify it works, and later deploy the exact same build to production. Snap deploys your application to cloud services like Heroku, DigitalOcean, AWS, and many, many more. You can also use Snap to push your gems to Ruby Gems. Best of all, setting up your build is simple and intuitive. Try Snap free for 30 days. Sign up at snapci.com/rubyrogues. Hey everybody, and welcome to episode 159 of the Ruby Rogues podcast. This week on our panel we have James Edward Gray.
Are you sure?
Avdi Grimm.
Good morning.
David Brady.
My imposter syndrome is so confident that it is now subject to the Dunning-Kruger effect.
I'm Charles Max Wood from devchat.tv, and this week we have a special guest, and that's Saron Yitbarek.
Yep, that was close enough.
Do you want to introduce yourself for folks who don't know who you are?
Sure. So my name is Saron Yitbarek. I'm a graduate from the Flatiron School, and now I'm a developer at the New York Tech Meetup in New York.
That was interesting. You said that in your RailsConf talk, and so kind of to jump right into it, you are a developer for the New York Meetup. Talk to us about that. That sounds cool.
Yes. So first of all, this is a real job. I do get paid to do this. It's like 40 hours a week. It's legit. But yeah, we are the largest meetup organization in the world. I think at this point we have almost 39,000 members. We've been going on for about 10 years. And when they brought myself and another developer on, we are called the Hackers in Residence. And so the idea is we're here for about 6 months through the end of July to build out a really robust kind of a community platform for our members. And so, yeah, that's what we're doing right now.
Man, I wish I could get paid for Meetup.
I just wish I could get paid to program.
That part is fun. It's great. I think every day, Vinny and I, he's my the other developer here, we walk in and we say, I can't believe we get paid to do this. Like, I feel like it's a big trick we're playing on everyone else, that they're paying us. It's just so awesome.
That's the sweet spot of programming. Never let that go. Because when you feel like you're getting paid to play, like you're getting paid to goof, it's like, I get paid to solve puzzles all day.
Yeah. That's exactly what it is. And it's great because, we don't have a design team. Like, it's literally just us two, and we have another developer that kind of checks in on us once in a while. And so we're doing the design, we're doing the UX, we're doing, the whole thing. So we really get to just figure out how to do all this stuff, and then people get to use it. So it's been amazing.
Yeah, I can identify with that. My current client, who incidentally is also James' client, James is probably wondering why he hasn't seen much code from me, and it's because I keep working on the pet projects for our client. And it's fun because it's like, so can you do something with this? And I'm like, well, I'd have to explore that. And it's just kind of that adventure through code. It's like, okay, how do I do this? How do I make this awesome thing happen? And yeah, you get that. I don't know what it is. For me, it's the exploration and then just having the win at the end where it works.
Yes.
It's way cool. I love it. And I'm glad that you're having that kind of experience, because sometimes I feel like people, I don't know how recent a graduate you are, but I feel like people kind of get through the education part and then they get into some job where they're kind of doing the mind-numbing regular stuff and they don't have those kinds of experiences, and it makes me sad.
That's honestly what I was worried about at first too when we graduated, because I graduated December, so pretty recently, and I was really worried that I would be at a company where because I'm a beginner, I wouldn't have that many responsibilities, and I'd be kind of doing minor things. And to be in a place where they trust us this much and we're given so much responsibility, I mean, that's just the best way to grow and learn. So It's been great. Yep.
So somebody said something about hacking education, and I'm wondering which college you broke into.
That makes me sound so much cooler than I really am. So I'm gonna stick with. I think that's my new bio is just hacking education everywhere.
So where did you go to school?
I went to school at the University of Maryland. I actually got a double degree in English and psychology because those were the most useful degrees to get a real job. But I was definitely. But I was actually planning to go to med school. I was pre-med for most of the time. I think I studied for the MCATs for about a month. And then I kind of realized that I didn't really want to be a doctor. I just really liked science. And I really liked how hard and challenging science was. And so I was kind of trying to figure out what to do next. And like along that journey, I'd done journalism and written for a really long time. And so ended up working at NPR briefly. But I felt like writing wasn't exactly challenging enough in the way that programming is, in that it wasn't problem solving. It wasn't as analytical as I wanted to be. And so around that time, I ended up reading the Steve Jobs book. And that was the first time I ever considered technology. Like that was the first time that anything along the lines of computer science and engineering and any of that stuff, which I always thought was just like never for me, that's when that became an option. And so I said, what is this world? Like, what is this thing that no one told me I could ever do? And so I ended up working at a tech startup doing businessy things. And I was always jealous of the programmers. And I said, what they are doing is so much cooler than what I can do. And that's when I started getting into programming.
That is like the coolest background story ever.
No
That's
kidding.
awesome.
Nice.
So, wow. So studied for the MCAT, psychology and English. My wife actually has similar training and did some programming as well. So that's kind of interesting.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, at the Slaughter School, I think we had a fair amount of like liberal arts degrees, and that just made me feel so much more validated to know that it wasn't just me. So it was great.
Programming used to be this like really hard science thing, and it had all the trappings of STEM and all the problems of it, right? With sexism and boys are better at math and all those other crap fallacies and that sort of thing. And your path into programming really just sounds like you're a liberal arts major who settled.
That's
You know what? I kind of wrote about the math relationship recently while I was on vacation. I wrote a blog article and it used to bother me when people said that programming is related to the math. And I think the reason that bothered me is it gave the impression that you had to know trig or calculus or something to build a web page, which is just ridiculous. And that always bothered me. But recently, I was talking to Katrina while I was out in Denver. We were discussing programming education. And one of the things we think that's key in programming education is, in addition to teaching language syntax and stuff like that, which is arguably kind of an easy part of programming, you have to teach how to solve problems. And that part definitely, at least shares a lot in common with math, right? How to break something down and work out a series of steps to be able to work through it. So I think that's kind of an interesting comparison between the math and the programming.
Yeah, I think that what happened for me was that the two worlds really came together, and I didn't think that they could. Like, I always thought that I would either have to be very mathy and analytical and then I could never really be creative and draw and write stories and do that stuff. And I always thought that I had to pick between one or the other. And I think that what I took away from the Steve Jobs book was that, here was this guy who was very, liberal artsy and paid attention to a lot of things that I cared about, but was also kind of leveraging the power of technology. And so to me, programming was a way to kind of combine the two things that I always wanted to combine that I never thought was possible. And so far it's proven to be true. So hopefully my career kind of validates that.
That's awesome.
So what does hacking education really mean?
I made it up. So I'll tell you why I made it up, though. I've been talking to Saron in emails and stuff, and we were just kind of having a conversation about various things she had done, and we'll touch on these. We've already hit some, but we'll hit the others. And it occurred to me that a lot of the things you've done, in my opinion, are kind of education hacks. Like even your, let's talk about your RailsConf talk real quick, because I just watched that last night. And It's a great talk on code reading. You want to give us like the just quick 2-minute summary?
Yeah, sure. So when I graduated Flatiron, I felt like, I learned a ton and I was really proud and excited of everything I'd done. But as I was also very painfully aware of how much more there was to do and how much more there was to learn. And so I asked, people in my community and senior developers, and I said, what is the fastest way I can get from being a novice to an expert? Like, what can I do to accelerate that path? And they all said, you should read code. And so I got a few Flatiron grads together and I said, hey, why don't we make this a thing? We'll call it Code Club, because every awesome group has to have an awesome name. And we said every Sunday morning at 11 o'clock, just for 1 hour, we're going to pick a code base and we're going to read it. And we're going to try to understand what's going on and how it works. And so we did. And it was a huge learning experience. Just kind of figuring out how to read the code was a thing in and of itself. Kind of figuring out how to then apply it to what you're learning, what you're doing on the job. But it's been a really great exercise. And so that is definitely like an education hack. It's kind of like creating our own curriculum out of, what's already existing. So that's what we do.
This is a great talk. Everybody should go watch it. They hit on some great insights, like limiting the amount of code in whatever they looked at. And that came about because initially you had thought, let's look into Sinatra. It's something we know, we're familiar with. But the problem is, wherever you jumped in, there was all these layers of abstraction that you had to get your head around, before that. And so I think you picked 100 lines of code, trying to pick projects that were below that. And I think some of us may think, 100 lines of code that, can you even find projects like that? But when you put a list of them up, there were names I recognized, that were pretty close to that. So I thought that was a great trick for keeping it manageable and something you could digest and stuff.
Yeah, I think the 100 lines is totally crucial. And also, if you think about, it's not like the real value in it really isn't the reading, it's the conversation that comes from it, right? So it's reading one line and saying, I haven't seen this before. What does this look like? And then you do a little bit of research. You open up Pry and you try a couple things out. That's really when the learning happens. But it's been hard, like keeping it at 100 lines of code. We've kind of wavered on that a little bit, but the smaller the better, especially as a novice. Because the other, I think, important thing to remember that, I wonder if more experienced developers are kind of familiar with this is like, it's really intimidating. Like being a new person in tech is very, very terrifying most of the time. And so even being able to finish a code base and say, I did it, I read it, I learned these 3 things, like that is a huge, boost of confidence. And so that's just as important as the actual learning that happens from the reading as well.
So one thing that I'm curious about is how do we get people to that point as members of the community? Because those wins, like you said, are really important, but I get those wins myself on certain things, but I don't know how to encourage new people to get that all the time.
Yeah. So one thing that I also do is I do a weekly Twitter chat called Code Newbie. And so if you're interested, it's just follow the hashtag Code Newbie every Wednesday at 9 p.m. Eastern time. And the point of that was I feel like I get a lot of win just from my community. And that was honestly the best part of going through the Flatiron Bootcamp was going through, this really hard academic endeavor with 40 other people with me who understand exactly how freaked out I am every step of the way. And so, we created the Code Newbie chat to kind of say that you don't have to be part of a boot camp to have this community. We're here for you and we can encourage you. And so, one thing that we're actually going to do come June is we're going to launch a campaign that we're going to call the Commit. And the idea is every single day, you're going to make one commit to some side project. It can be the smallest commit. It can be the biggest commit, but the idea is to code every single day. And I think that if you kind of create a community and you create these little small win opportunities and you allow people to easily engage, and easily jump in and experience that, I think that's how you do it. Because the thing is, a win doesn't have to be good to feel really good, right? Like the first time I did CSS and I made a background yellow, it changed my world, and that alone was huge. And so I personally try to do it on Twitter, whenever I see someone who I know is new accomplish something or is about to be in a hackathon or just something, I'll tweet about them and I'll say, congratulations, good luck. And I think it's really a lot of the encouragement comes from everyone else noticing and doing the encouraging.
I want to toot Dave's horn a little bit because I know he's done something like this and maybe he has some insight that he can add.
I'm all for this. Go ahead.
No, I just remember you talking about lessons that you learned and things like that. I know that you did a commit a day for a while.
I gave a lightning talk at Mountain West where I did an experiment a few years ago where my New Year's resolution was to ship code every single day. So it had to be, my only requirement was that it had to be shippable. So it had to be, complete, done, whatever. And there were lessons that I learned. I'll put a link to the talk if I can find it online. And for so-called experienced developers, the biggest trap that they fall into is the same trap that junior developers fall into. And that is trying to do too much, trying to write 10,000 lines of code before you ship something. And there's this, I had a day where I spent 8 hours writing this big, huge program. And at 11:55 p.m., I realized I'm not going to finish in time to ship what I need to do. And so I opened up a different project, found a 3-line method that needed to be refactored, changed it into, 2 3-line methods. I extracted a method out of it and shipped it, and then threw away the 8 hours of code and went to bed. And it was like Saron just said, it was like a CSS tweaker. It was something really simple. And at the end of the day, I realized, man, I poured all this energy into this thing and it was frustrating. And then I made this 1-line change and I shipped it and it felt awesome.
Yep.
I've been doing a similar trick recently. Like just before I went on vacation, I wrote a library in one day, and so I went through the entire process from empty GitHub repo to working code to documentation to ship a gem, publish a gem, all these things through the process in just one day. And it was great. Like, I felt super great about it. I took something that I'd been wanting to play around with and something I wanted to make it easier for me to use in my projects. And what was really cool about this that both Saron and David are kind of hitting on in this discussion is obviously I didn't write very much. I didn't have time, so it's all told, it's about 50 lines of code. It's a simple little library. It qualifies for the under 100 lines of code, review it task. And it's great. I love it. And I think these little wins can be really great and can lead to bigger things. And then, if you get in the habit of doing this, you can kind of build up this ecosystem of stuff that you're creating and playing with. And I think that leads to bigger ones.
Exactly. And I think that one other thing is managing your own expectations, because I feel like, I have extremely high expectations for myself all the time, which means I'm almost always disappointed. But one thing that I remember one of my really good friends, Stephanie, said when we were in school was, she said that her goal was to make sure she progressed every day, that every day she was moving forward, whatever that means. And so I think that one thing I've seen with a lot of, people who are new to programming is they'll say, I need to understand everything about Ruby in 2 weeks. And that's, obviously impossible. And instead modifying that and saying, I need to learn one new thing a day is just, and there's your win right there. And it's something that you can, measure yourself, and it's accomplishable and it's doable. So I think that just managing expectations and understanding what your limits are is a huge, huge part of not being overwhelmed and not being as intimidated as you need to be.
Now, is this something that they encourage at the boot camps? I know you only have experience with the one, but is this something that they encourage there that's kind of built into the process or the curriculum, or is this something that you kind of figured out as you went?
I think it's a little bit of both. Obviously I can't speak to all boot camps. I can only speak to my own. And even then I can only speak to my own experience, right? And so from that perspective, I think that we're all very frustrated with how much there was to learn, and we always felt a little bit behind. And one thing that Avi, who's the dean and founder of Flowering School, one thing that he said that I always remember is, he said, it's going to seem really hard right now because you don't know it, but as soon as you know it, it's going to be really easy. And that's one thing that we all kind of had to internalize and say, okay, this thing that we're really frustrated that we don't get, once we get it, everything will be fine. And it's going to seem easy from now on. And so I think this idea of just being patient with ourselves was a huge, theme throughout the whole thing. And it's been something I've been trying to tell myself as well.
You've talked a lot about, in several different contexts, how intimidating the tech industry can be. I think that's pretty insightful. I have some ideas in my head about why that might be, so I'm interested in hearing your take on what is so intimidating about, getting into programming.
I think that there's always been kind of the wall between, most people and technology, right? Like technology is something that for, non-tech people is something that's to be consumed, and you're not supposed to break it, and you're not supposed to mess with it, and you're just supposed to kind of take it in and appreciate it. And so the idea that I can dare, break it open and do stuff with it is just like, that's just a terror. Like, I'm not supposed to do that. I'm not supposed to open up my phone. I'm not supposed to, kind of undo things and figure things out. I'm supposed to just sit here and consume it. So I think that when you're, in really any sense, I think that when you're trying to transition from being a consumer to being a creator, I think your whole mindset changes, and you're essentially saying that I have the audacity to know enough about this thing to make it into the thing that I want. And if you're not used to thinking in those terms, which I mean, honestly, I don't think we're kind of in our education system, I don't think that we're trained to think in the creator perspective. That journey is just terrifying.
One of my favorite quotes is Larry Wall talking about the 3 virtues of a programmer, which are laziness, impatience, and hubris. And you were reminding me of the last one, hubris, which is the the idea that if something works poorly, you actually think that you can make it better.
Yes.
Right.
Or that you can take something you don't understand and just go, why not? I can do something with this.
Yes,
of course I can. I'm me.
Right. It is kind of a power thing to sit down and think, what do I want to make this computer do today, right?
Exactly. That's what it is. It's a power thing. And if you think about, the fact that you have to go through, 4 years of school before you have a degree in something, and then you have to be, a low level position until you move up. Like, there's this whole system of you have to train forever until you're kind of sort of qualified to do this thing. So the idea that, I took a 3-month boot camp and now I'm building websites, that's just insane. Like, that just doesn't make any sense. That's not how I'm trained. And so this idea of being an expert to some degree and kind of going through some kind of a official process that's been approved by society, I think is also a huge part of the hacker mentality that needs to kind of be broken down before you can kind of just be a programmer.
I want to touch on that for a second a little more. Do you feel like you needed permission?
I think that's a big part of it. And it's interesting because I know that I don't, and I love that I know that I don't, but I still feel like I do. Like, it's like a disconnect, between what you know and how you feel. And it's like, I know that I don't need permission. I know, even, I was working on an app specifically for Code Club, and I was like freaking myself out this weekend because I'm thinking, I know I don't need to ask anybody to, build this app. I know I can just do it and put it up, but I'm really going to do it and put it up. You know what I mean? Like, there's this like conflict between like my heart and my head. And so I'm hoping and I'm trusting that if I just do it and just, shut up and get over it, then, eventually it'll go away. And it's interesting because I went through this whole like personal thing when I submitted my talk for RailsConf, actually. And I wrote a blog post about it, called Demons and CFPs. And I call my imposter syndrome my demons, because that's what they are. And, when I think of a speaker, I think of someone who's an expert. I think of someone who's really experienced, who's been doing it for years, who has all this wisdom and knowledge and, depth to share with the world. And so, when I think it was as Avi proposed the idea of submitting a CFP, I was like, of course not. That's insane. Like, I'm in no position at all to be speaking to anybody about anything. I've like graduated 2 months ago. And so I ended up having coffee with Vanessa Hurst, who did Girl Development and a few other things. And I told her my idea for Code Club, and she was like, yeah, you should totally do it. And I said, well, if Vanessa Hurst says that I should, then I must. And so I did, and I submitted it, I think, 5 minutes before it was due. And the whole time I was just beating myself up. And the whole time I was like in tears, and my poor fiance staring at me like I'm crazy. And I'm just thinking like, why, like who am I? You know what I mean? Like, who am I to submit this thing? And I have no idea what I'm talking about. And no one wants to hear about reading code. That's ridiculous. And just all these, really evil thoughts. And it just all goes back to permission. Like, I needed permission. I needed someone to tell me that I was good enough, whether that meant through a position, through, a degree, whatever that was. And so but I trusted that if I just did it and I submitted it, even if I didn't get it, and I definitely did not expect to have my talk picked, I trusted that that was an important exercise in just seeing something you're terrified of and doing it anyway. And then next time that I really needed to do it, it would come in handy and be a lot easier.
That is so awesome. So I want to hammer on just a little bit more on this for the sake of other people out there that are in this same position.
Now she knows our dirty little secret about presenters, right?
Yes, exactly. Exactly. So what I really want to ask is, how did you feel once you got it submitted? And I'm guessing, well, you know what? I won't put words in your mouth. How did you feel once you got it submitted? And then after you got accepted, how did you feel? And then how did you feel about how you felt after you submitted? Does that make sense?
That makes a lot of sense.
Was there a change?
I'm going to take you through my RailsConf feeling journey. It's going to be great. So when I first submitted, I was relieved. I was really proud of myself that I had done it. I had absolutely no expectations that it would be picked, but I was just really glad that, I saw something that I wanted, that I was afraid of, and I did it anyway. Once, and I honestly, I kind of forgot about it. And I think it was like maybe a month later that they started telling the speakers. And I saw the email and I saw just the subject, that says like, your talk for RailsConf was accepted. And I was on the train on my way home and I was sitting, across from these two little old ladies. And when I saw it, I shouted, "What?" And then I cried and then I started laughing hysterically. And I think they looked so afraid of me. So that was my reaction. And then I, told like everyone. And then once I did the talk and it was kind of over, I was really, really surprised, honestly. I was really surprised that so many people seemed to enjoy it. I was really surprised by the response, and people saying that they wanted to start their own code clubs and they wanted to, read code as well. And I was really surprised and overwhelmed and just really humbled by the response, which I wasn't expecting at all. And to me, it was just a really big, it was a big win, but it was also just a reminder that you don't get the things that you want, you get the things that you go after. Mm-hmm. And so for me, it was just, the next time you want something and you're afraid of it, you just have to do it and hope that it ends well. So it was great. It was a great experience.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah,
You're very welcome.
That's really cool. I watched the talk and it was great. Even it made me want to do a code club. I mean, I read lots of code for various reasons, but it had never occurred to me to like do it as a group before, like to have like a book club around it, And I think that's a really cool idea. I love what you said about speaking and doing it and stuff. This is a long time, I think, myth and kind of problem in our culture is that we seem to think that those who give talks are these, super experts. But talking about how tech can be intimidating, one of the reasons it intimidates me is that every rock I pick up has a giant Alice in Wonderland style rabbit hole under it. It's like, oh, what's HTTP? And if I want, I could spend days and days learning what that is, or I could just learn the basics. Well, it has some symbol verbs and some requests and stuff like that. But I almost have to choose to ignore a lot of those rabbit holes so that I can keep something manageable about my learning in tech. And I have to trust that some others, they know that stuff better than me and they're handling those parts, and things like that, which is why the conference talk is not really that intimidating. I mean, first of all, you're speaking for typically 30 minutes to an hour. That may seem like a lifetime when you're up there, but really it's nothing. I mean, teaching someone a concept in 30 minutes to an hour is very quick. So you don't have to, have this ridiculously deep level of knowledge. And then two, you've mentioned things like the Dreyfus model of skill acquisition. Somebody closer to you on the Dreyfus scale is better for teaching you, than someone who's considerably higher. So it all turns out to be a dirty little secret, that, only the experts get up there and give talks. It just isn't true, or it shouldn't be true. It would be much better if that wasn't the case.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, especially the part where I think that someone slightly ahead of you is probably a much better teacher than, someone who's an expert. When I was in school, actually, when I was pre-med, I taught organic chemistry because I took the class. I thought it was extremely difficult for no good reason, and I wanted to do a better job of teaching it. And, a lot of the students preferred me over like the graduate students and the professors because I understood that gap, that gap of how you think it works and then how it actually does work and being able to bridge that. And I think that people who are a lot, further along than you are, I think that gap is kind of hard to remember where that is and how that feels. Mm-hmm. And I feel like, that was probably the most frustrating part for me before the Flatiron School, I quit my job, and for 3 months, I taught myself how to code, mostly through like Treehouse, Code School, those kind of resources. And I was really, really frustrated because I felt like it really wasn't made for someone who had no idea what they were doing. It was really made for someone who kind of already had a context. And I feel like that's like probably the biggest missing thing in education is the context. It's not, like, do you want to learn Ruby? But it's more of, wait, but why Ruby? And why Ruby on Rails? And what does it do? And kind of giving me an idea of the direction of, where we're going with this and how it can be applied is what's missing. And I feel like most people jump straight into like, this is what a variable is. And that doesn't mean anything to me until I know the bigger picture of it. And I feel like someone who's a little bit beginner understands that frustration and could probably do a better job teaching.
That's exactly. I agree with you completely. That's what Katrina and I were talking about in Denver, about how teaching language syntax, what does that mean? So I could, like you say, store variables and do if statements. Now what do I do? That doesn't tell you anything. Mm-hmm. So you have this blog where you draw lots of cartoons to explain concepts, and I found that kind of interesting as I was looking at them in the past. And then after watching your RailsConf talk, all of your slides were actually this cartoon story that you told on stage, and it was really cool. Where does the cartooning come from? That's interesting.
Yeah. So when I was really little, I taught myself how to draw because my dad was a really good, he wasn't like a professional artist, but he always doodled, and I thought what he did was amazing. And I wanted to be like him. And I actually had this book called How to Draw Real People. And it was, a book about how to draw faces. And I remember in the beginning, there's like that page with testimonials saying like, before I read this book, this is how I drew. And then afterwards, this is how I draw now. And going through that book was so painful and so hard. But what kept me going was one of the testimonials was one from a 9-year-old girl. And I was 8 at the time. And I would look at her and look at her beautiful picture, and I'd be like, I am not letting this girl beat me. Like, there's no way. I'm so beating her. And so I have to like thank her for getting me through that, because that's how I learned to draw. But I didn't really see anything to do with that. Like, I didn't really, I had no plans to be an artist or anything like that. And I think last year I started reading a lot of the Oatmeal again, and I just love his work, and he's amazing. And so when I was applying to the Flatiron School, I went through their application process, and it was, typical questions like, why do you want to program? Tell me about a problem you solved. And when I read through my application, I felt like it didn't really capture who I was as a person. And so I thought about it, and I said, I want them to know I'm creative. I want them to know, that I can tell a story. Like, how can I best do that? And I thought back to the Oatmeal comics that he does. And so I said, I'm going to do a cartoon. And so I like opened up my Photoshop. I think I spent like a week on that cartoon. And that was the first time that I actually tried to tell a story out of something that I drew. Usually I just doodle. And it got like a huge response. I still get tweets and emails about it now, and it's been, almost a year. And so that's kind of where that came from. And what surprised me was that the response that I got was that people who, I didn't write the cartoon for told me that they could relate to it and that they were able to connect with the story. And so that made me feel like, well, I guess this whole cartooning thing is something that you can do a lot with, and you can tell a story with, and you can teach with. And so that's kind of where that came from.
I mean, it's awesome as another medium to, getting a point across. I mean, I'll put the link in the show notes, but you have this one where you explain how web apps work with pictures of frogs. It's so cool. Like, you just read through it and you're like, here's all these pictures of frogs, and it's engaging, and makes it easier to swallow these, often crazy concepts that computer people deal with all the time. And like your slides and your RailsConf talk, I just got sucked into them, because there were these people and they were doing things in the slides, and instead of, your typical boring, here's a chunk of code kind of thing. And I found it really engaging.
Exactly. And specifically with the cartoon kind of concept stuff, like the goal was to, like, I prioritize the narrative of the concept before the jargon. And I feel like that's probably the biggest difference that I've seen is a lot of people, I think, start with the jargon and then go kind of work backwards to the concept, which just doesn't make sense to me. And so, like, specifically one cartoon that I made, How Web Apps Work, that one, I literally drew the cartoon that I wish someone had drawn for me. This is how, like, I would have wanted to learn it. And so that's where that came from. But yeah, it's incredible. I think that the world would be a better place if there was just more cartoons in it. So.
Can't argue with that.
Yes, we approve.
Well, and that's a good education hack as well, right? I mean, they talk about, like, what should I write a blog post about? I don't know. Write the blog post that you wish you had access to last week as you were struggling through some concept. Yeah.
Very good point.
Yes. Because, they emphasize blogging a lot at the Flatiron School, and that was always really hard for me because I don't really write, and I don't really enjoy writing highly technical things, because those aren't the things that I would enjoy reading about. Unless I'm, looking to solve that specific problem, I wouldn't just, for fun, read really technical blog posts. And so the easiest way for me to blog and kind of keep telling stories was to write the blog posts that I wish existed. And those were usually about concepts and less about how to do this thing.
So I love this thought that you have about not being super thrilled about, like, the highly technical stuff, but finding yourself fascinated by concepts. So as you approach this, like, through drawing and through sketching, what are some things that you see that maybe somebody who's, at a similar skill level to you, but coming from a technical background isn't going to see? What are some of the things that you have a unique perspective on?
I think it's really just the ability to tell a story. And I think that, to me, a story is, I have a problem, I have a solution, and there's a journey of how I get there. And so, in anything that I write or draw, that's what I try to go after. It's like, what is the big conflict here, and how do I make it interesting and engaging, but how do I tell the story of resolving that conflict? And I think it's that narrative arc that I see is largely missing in most kind of educational tools.
Do you find that affecting the way you write code?
Oh, that's a really good question. One thing that I realized after kind of talking to a few people about the work that I do at New York Tech Meetup is that we don't just code, we're developing a product. And so I think that it influences the way we develop the product as a whole. And so when we, pick a feature and decide, what to work on and what to do, I think that the idea of focusing it around, a story comes a lot easier and is a lot more natural. And so in that sense, yes, definitely. And then kind of, streamlining that down to, how do I code the specific thing and what am I actually trying to do and how does that get resolved definitely feeds into it.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good point. Again, de-emphasizing the code aspect. I think some of us have that problem. I know I'm definitely guilty of it. I get so interested in the code and the code tricks and forget that what's really important is that we're adding some feature to an app or whatever. And that's the actual narrative, as you put it, of what we're doing.
Exactly. And that was, and I think in the first few months, that was really hard for me to appreciate too, because I really wanted to write good code. Like, that was the whole thing. I was like, I want to write really beautiful, clean code, and everyone's going to be so jealous of the cleanness of my code. And I kind of had to be reminded that the goal is really not that at all. The goal is to write something that's usable and shippable and, on time, and that works. And so I kind of had to reframe the way I thought about my work and my day-to-day from the context of, is this actually useful? How important is this? How many people will be affected by this? Is there a solution that already exists? And kind of asking those user-focused questions was really important.
Yeah, that's a great point. A lot of times, we have the tendency to over-engineer something because, like you say, we know that it would be perfect if it was designed this way, but working beats perfect. Right?
Yep,
exactly.
And your idea of clean code will change over the years. I can remember 15 years ago, before unit testing and before people were writing a lot of particularly descriptive code, I think clean code for me meant that all the tab stops were lined up correctly and every method had a descriptive comment. And then came along this heretical idea of code shouldn't have comments. The code should be clear enough to not need the comment. And that doesn't mean just take comments out of your code. It means write better code. And now I find myself looking at gnarly, twisted masses of code and going, oh, wow, they broke those two dependencies apart so that you can plug them one into the other and test them in isolation. That's really elegant. And I'm looking at this gnarly, ugly mass of code that 15 years ago me would have gone, oh, what is this mess?
Yeah.
And I look at it and I go, this is so clean at the architecture level.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
For sure. So one of the things you told me in our emails when we were talking about Flatiron School that I found very interesting was you said you felt Flatiron School gave you permission to call yourself a programmer. Can you talk about that? Because I think it's neat.
Yeah, I think I wrote a blog post on that too. How for me, like the hardest part about going through the journey was, being able to call myself a programmer. And I feel like I could officially say it once I got a job because, I'm like getting paid to do it now. And, the first few times I said it, it felt very awkward and very uncomfortable. And then now I'm like really proud of it. It's awesome. But yeah, it just goes back to this gap, right? Between like your heart and your mind. And, when I think about a programmer, I don't think about someone who looks like me or has my background in any way. I'm an Ethiopian, Black woman, immigrant, English major. I went to, a Magna program focusing on like writing and media production. Like there's nothing about me that I see in tech as a whole. And so for me to kind of dare label myself as like one of you guys it was a huge kind of emotional, mental leap that I had to make. And what I found really interesting is, a lot of my personal struggles with that has to do with, my race and my gender and my background. But what I realized that at the Flatiron School was that a lot of other people felt the same way for very different reasons. For a lot of people, it was, or not a lot, but, for other people, it was things like, I didn't go to the right school, and so clearly I'm not smart enough. Or I went to the best school, why is this so hard? Or my family is a family of engineers, but I'm so different from them. I'm, the black sheep of the family. Like everyone had their own reasons for not feeling like they belonged. And when you get, a group of imposters together, we feel a lot better about ourselves. And it made the journey just a lot easier. And it was great knowing that like I wasn't alone in my struggle, that even though my situation was unique and my reasons were unique, we all had our own reasons.
I find that so heartening, just that I think in a lot of ways, we find things that hold us apart from the community or whatever. And, when it comes right down to it, I mean, this is an audio podcast. So the only reason that anyone would know that you're any of those things, except maybe a woman, because you sound like a woman, is because you said it. And the only reason that any of it matters is because it doesn't. And, it's just because, you get on and you talk about what you know about. It's important stuff for everybody. And it's funny how we put ourselves in those positions, and then at the same time, how we can get together with other people and how it can change our outlook on things.
Yeah.
I totally think there should be a superhero troop called the Imposters.
Should we go save the day? I don't know if we're good enough.
But when you get them all together, they're good enough.
There you go.
There you go.
That's right. Katrina talked about, when she was on the show, she would talk about how, a lot of us have stories about, I started programming at age 3 on my toaster. And so because she didn't start learning till age 30, she felt that, that means she's 30 years behind us, and she can't be a great programmer or whatever, which of course is silly, of course. But yeah, I see where those things, push you. Whereas to me, I'm like, I have friends who are, much more mild programmers than I am, and they'll show me something that they built that, a simple hack, a simple automation, a simple home trick or something, and that meets their needs and it speeds something up, makes something easier. And to me, that's a total win. And you get to call yourself a programmer at that very point, no matter how much you know about, how to roll a binary search algorithm or whatever. Who cares?
Well, the other thing that I see there too is that in a lot of cases, the more veteran programmers are pretty comfortable in the way that they do things. And it's the new people who are struggling with some of the more basic things. They're the ones that are really innovating. I mean, they come up with solutions to these problems that we don't even think about. And in a lot of cases, those turn into solutions to problems that, that would save me 10 minutes every time I do this thing. But I don't think about it because, it feels so high level, so beginnerish, sometimes. But at the same time, they make some very important contributions to people's workflows and to the community in general, just because they're innovating to cover up some of the things that they just haven't quite gotten the practice on yet.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there was actually a great talk while I was in Denver. I went up and hit the Boulder Ruby group, and Ira T. Howard dropped in and gave a talk that night based off of this blog post he wrote called Static is the New Black. And he was talking about his experiences in building static websites and turning a lot of what we do into static websites instead of the more dynamic things we tend to build. And what I thought was very interesting about that is how many problems it glossed over. So, for example, if you build a dynamic page that's, dynamically building up the content every time somebody hits that endpoint, and you have an N+1 query problem in it, right? The dreaded N+1 query, then it's a big deal because, every time you hit that endpoint, you got to pull all these records, it's sloppy, it wastes a bunch of time, and it makes the site slow. And Ira was talking about, as we're doing this, they still have model layers and all that. It's just that when the thing is run, it ends up rendering out the final content that then will just be shown forever. And he said, now I don't care if I have an N+50 query problem. Who cares? It runs once on some developer's box. If it works on my machine, then the thing that gets rendered out, boom, that's it, done. Who cares? And I thought that was very interesting that, that turns out not to be a problem anymore in those scenarios because that's not what they're after. And that means that they can let less experienced programmers write certain things and do those because that's no longer a barrier that they're going to run into. And I think that's kind of a neat way to arrange things. We should try to find more ways to do that.
Well, are there any other non-standard ways to learn things that we haven't talked about yet? By the way, I'm looking at this cartoon. It's pretty awesome.
You should check out the one on the very front of her page that explains how to pronounce her name.
It's very helpful.
I was going to throw that as a joke, and then I realized that it's kind of like when people come up and make Brady Bunch jokes at me. I'm like, "Oh, Sir Ron, yeah, I bet you've never heard that joke before, ever."
Yes, I try to be very helpful on my blog. Yes.
Yeah. It was interesting that part of the reason I was hammering on about permission earlier, mm-hmm. and then you mentioned that you're in privileged terms, you've got kind of some intersectionality working against you, right? I mean, you're not a white native. Are you native English speaking?
My English is actually my third language.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. So I think we can say
why is your English better than my first language?
Yeah, I think we can dispense with native English as a disadvantage for you because you're clearly quite fluent. But I mean, if we take white American men, they have certain invisible doors that just open for them. In fact, they open automatically and silently, and they don't know they're there. And I didn't want to use the P word privilege. I wanted to use the P word permission earlier because as I'm working on the job replacement guide, I'm talking with a lot of people that are going through job turnover, and I'm finding middle-aged white American men who are not giving themselves permission to be a programmer or to trying to thread a needle here now because now I have actually commingled privilege with permission, but ignore that for a minute because everybody knows that I'm an idiot and socially awkward and all that good stuff. But the point is that all of us, quite frequently, our imposter syndrome just kind of rears its ugly head, or heads, right? I mean, it's like a 7-headed hydra sometimes, and basically says, why even try this? You can't do this. And it's not confined. I'm confident that it is exacerbated by privilege, but it is not confined to axes of privilege. That there are people that are at the top of the, shall we say, privilege food chain that have these same problems as well, that have to say, okay, I have to give myself permission to move forward, or I'm going to sit here in a cage of my own making and life will continue to pass me by.
Yeah. For me, I think that my biggest secret weapon is kind of how my parents raised me, which is they never told me that I was smart. They never told me I was talented. They never told me I was gifted. They told me that I had the potential. And that's been nice. the message that they've always kind of, beat into me is that I have the potential to do anything. And if I don't reach that potential, that's on me. And if I do, it's also on me. And so I think that my biggest kind of, secret weapon against my imposter syndrome is just going back to that and going back to this belief. And I really do believe that everything is in my control. And even if it's not, thinking that it is really helpful.
Exactly.
Uh-huh.
And so, for me, it's, I know that this is hard. I know that, I feel really lonely right now. And, I know that my demons are getting really loud. But mom always said that you have the potential. And if you just work really hard and just focus on the thing that you want to do, then you can break those barriers. And I hesitate to say that anyone, anywhere can break all barriers. I think that's a little kind of too naive of me. But in my situation, that's always been how I dealt with it. And, I don't really believe in this idea of people being smart or people being a genius or, I believe that people work hard and, yes, luck has to do with it, privilege has to do with it, but I really, really believe that if I work hard and if I do what I need to do, I am in control of my own destiny. And that's gotten me very, very far.
I came from almost exactly the opposite background. I was raised being told I was special, gifted, smart, whatever. And yeah, I had ADHD. So you take those things and roll them up into a ball. And what you get is a white boy who has lots of privilege and can skate by and can, do wonderful on tests, scores, 95, 98% on all of the tests and looks great on the ACT. That's the SAT for us Westerners. And yet I had a C+ GPA. And I guess it was a B. I finally got it up to a B- by the time I graduated. And I literally had to go through years of therapy to get to a point where I realized that kind of upbringing was actually toxic, because if your life goes out of control, you get fired or you get laid off or something bad happens to you, if you're special and you're gifted, that should not happen to you. Life should not do that to you. Last week, I picked the just world hypothesis or the just world fallacy as one of my picks. And this is straight out of that fallacy, that if you are special and privileged, these bad things can't happen to you. But it's even more pernicious than that, which is that if life isn't giving you what you want, you have all this entitlement to things that you should be getting. And so not only do you not give yourself permission to go get them, but you almost do the opposite. Instead of failing to give yourself permission, you actively forbid yourself to go pursue something because you feel that you're entitled to it. Doggone it. It's the ready, set, deserve mentality. And
the mountain should come to me.
The mountain should come to me. The mountain should already be here. Doggone it. And it was so enlightening to have somebody basically say, any day of your life that you choose to, you can wake up and give yourself permission to work and to go after things that you want. And that was a game changer for my entire life. And I still battle bad habits from thinking that I'm clever, thinking that I'm funny, thinking that I'm cute, thinking that I'm, the center of everyone's attention. And okay, that attitude goes hand in hand with ADD, and, everybody loves me for it, I hope. Don't anybody answer that. But, But when you wake up and say, I can give myself permission to start working on this problem, you can set the entitlement aside. You can stop worrying about where the mountain is and just pick up your shovel and move one load of dirt. And like you said, I also hesitate to say anybody has the potential to become anything because, not too many people in the third world, in a slave culture, in the bottom of their culture, are going to become first world astronauts, right? Like literal astronauts. That job is, that career path is probably just implicitly closed to them. But everybody can pick up a shovel and move one shovel full of dirt. And we're going beyond hacking education and getting into hacking life itself, which I think is awesome.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I definitely know that I'm privileged, and I don't think that really occurred to me until I was talking to someone on Twitter, and we were talking about boot camps, and she was saying how she really wanted to learn to code and she wanted to be a programmer, but she just couldn't. And I said, well, why not? You can just code whenever you want. There's lots of free resources, and you can just pick up a book and just learn, go do it. And she said to me, well, I'm working a minimum wage job, and I have a family to take care of, and, I'm working all the time, and I just don't have the time to do that. And even if I did, it would take a lot longer than it took me, and it took me 6 months at most, including, the time I took off. And that was the first time I realized in my situation that money had a huge, role in it. I was really privileged that I had saved and I could afford, not work for 6 months and pay thousands of dollars of tuition. And so that to me is one of the most kind of, I'm not really sure what to do with that. I don't really have a work hard and you can overcome it solution for that one. So yeah, I definitely acknowledge my role that, luck has to do with it, privilege has to do with it. But I find that my energy and my time is better spent thinking about the things that I can control and trying to make sure that I optimize for that. And in general, that's been pretty helpful.
I love that we have somebody on the podcast right now who is at 4 or 5 levels of intersectionality has just claimed to be privileged. I'm sorry, you have just taught me a lot about the concept of privilege right there. Thank you. That was awesome. To be clear to anybody listening, it's all about gratitude and it's all about recognizing what you have. I wasn't trying to make a snide comment there. I was trying to make a sincerely grateful comment because that's awesome.
Yeah.
I have a question which is kind of turning the conversation back a bit, if you don't mind, because we were talking about reading code earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we had a reading code episode a while back, but I'm curious. Yeah, I'm curious from your perspective as someone relatively new to the field, are there any tips that you came across for effectively reading code as you were putting this together?
I did a little bit of research, but most of what I learned just kind of happened just from doing it. And so most of the tips that I use, keeping it to 100 lines of code, kind of just came from us trying to do bigger things and realizing it wasn't going to work. But I think most of the things that I'd seen about it was more of reading code on your own. And what we decided to do was read code as a group. And I think that honestly, a really big part in the running theme of hacking education is really about doing things together. Because what I realized from the code club was that it wasn't just, me getting information from this code base. It's me getting information from Dan and Stephanie and Ian and David and us kind of leveraging our own different experiences and things that we had learned on our own jobs and our own side projects and being able to share that and having the code base be kind of the excuse to bring all of that out. And it's interesting because before programming, I was not really a team person. I really like doing things on my own and kind of having full control of every situation as much as possible. And I learned, through programming and through pairing and through the school and, again, during Code Club and Code Newbie Twitter chats that we really do go further together. And that when we are comfortable saying that we don't know how to do this and look to someone else for help and guidance, that's kind of where the magic happens.
So when reading code, you recommend doing it with company?
Yes, definitely. And it's a lot easier to get unstuck too. Like if there's something that you don't know, you don't understand, I think it's a lot easier to say, I don't want to do this anymore. This sucks. And then just to never pick it up again. But when you have a group, you're going to be more accountable to doing it consistently.
I think it's interesting about how we're talking about how programming is a social sport, which I definitely agree with. In your talk, you had a point where one of the people you were reading code with, I think it was Dan, you saw some method and then he was like, well, why does it have to be that way or something? He generated a question about this method and how it could be better and how that led to this tangent of you all learning, For me, that always happens. Like, I see some code and I'm like, I could write that in 10 lines or whatever. And then I try and I have a whole better appreciation for what that code was actually doing rather than what I thought it was doing. Right?
Yes. And that's probably, I think after that, when we kind of realized that we could do that we could kind of point to something and say, that's not right. Let's see what we can do about it and see how we would do it. That made it a lot more interesting because now we have like this interactive point, and this kind of excuse to work with the code and do something ourselves. So yeah, that definitely made it a lot more interesting.
When these group settings, is there a structure that you follow?
I think a structure kind of came into place. So, I think during the week before, we'll each submit a code base and say, this is what I want to read. This is how long it is. This is why I want to read it. And then, at 11 o'clock, we'll pick one. And generally we just start from the top and we'll just go straight down, and kind of pause, every few lines and say, does anyone have any questions? What do you guys think about this? Does it, is everything making sense? Does anyone want to research anything? But, I think, we already know each other, we're friends. And so we're very comfortable in that we don't need much of a structure to make it productive. So I think, everyone in our group is comfortable saying, wait, stop. That didn't make sense. Let's review that again. So we kind of have a loose structure, but nothing too formal.
That's awesome.
So if somebody wants to organize this kind of a code reading group out in their area, wherever they are, what recommendations do you have?
I think one person who actually has started one after the talk, I think he's had at least one session so far. He ended up putting up just a Google Plus page that he sent out and kind of tweeted out and said, this is what I'm looking for, which kind of gave me the idea to build a little app that just, allows you to have a little page that says, I'm looking to have a code club, looking for 5, people who want to join. These are the dates and tell me if you're interested. So I'm working on that now and I'd love to share it with you guys once it's up. But other than that, I started a Twitter handle. It's called @ReadingCodeGood. And so, I'm happy to promote that and help you find your group. But apart from that, I think that there's a lot of community organizations to reach out to find people. Because that was really the big question is how do I find other people? And so, Rails Girls in New York, there's Code Crew, there's Hacker Hours. So I think if you find the community organizers and the community organizations who are interested in promoting, especially for beginner level coders, I think that's a good place to start finding people. And Meetups also is a really, really good one to find people who are interested. But it's really about, I really, really believe in small groups. Like we have a cap at 5 people. And so I think that if you find a few people to meet with and you're consistent, that's really all you need to get started.
And so you kind of had an implicit requirement in there that you think it's probably a good idea to have a group that's at close to the same level you are, right?
I think that anything over 5 kind of gets too crowded. And I think there's a higher chance that people will be more quiet and not be as comfortable speaking out and saying, I don't understand this and can we stop here? And to me, those tangents are really the value of it. And I think that if you have less than 3, I think that you kind of lose the sense of accountability. So I recommend 3 to 5 being kind of the nice balance. But, yeah.
I was actually referring to skill level there, actually. That it's probably valuable if you're all within 1 or 2 levels of each other on the Dreyfus scale, probably. Right?
I think so, but to be fair, I haven't tried it any other way. And actually, it's interesting. I think we're gonna have a new addition to our team who's someone who's been coding a lot longer. So I'll be able to let you know how that goes in a few. But I think that it's helpful to have people around the same skill level, but I think it's more important to have people who are willing to learn and be curious and interested and be supportive. Because if you're a more experienced person and you kind of, overtake the conversation, that's not helpful. And so I think the attitude is probably more important than the experience.
Really good point. Yeah. This is all awesome. I think it's so cool the way you've figured out so many of these useful education tricks. I mean, I'm learning a ton just from the things you're doing. So, as an experienced programmer. So I feel like you have a secret insight into how to figure these things out that I'm jealous of. So I think that's great.
Yeah, you've got a superpower there.
There we go. That's why I need my superpower imposter team.
That's right.
That's awesome. That's awesome. No, it harkens back to that Dreyfus model gap, right? Where, yeah, I'm like, you're describing things and I'm like, I remember covering that ground and I remember forgetting it.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And it wasn't useless knowledge that I could just discard. It was something that I forgot that I shouldn't have.
Yes, that happens all the time. It's very painful.
I love it when I go to Google some programming thing and it's my own blog that comes up. You know, oh yeah, I knew this once upon a time.
Well, I actually like if I run into a particular error or something, I'll put a blog post out. You know, that's basically here's how you solve it. And yeah, I expect to see my blog come up.
Writing a note to future me.
That's right.
A few of those, yeah. I've got a blog post on how to set up SimpleCov to run when you run your spec suite, because I only do it once per project and I always forget in between. And so yeah, I just wrote a blog post where I said, this blog post is just for me so that Google will index it so that I can find it again later. And yeah, I had like a reply going, okay. I'm like,
that's a
sorry.
really good idea.
Sorry, I'm sticking something into Google's memory on purpose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to do that. That's a really good idea. It's just notes to myself.
Yeah.
I use a similar hack. If you're an Evernote user, you can install the plugin in your browser, and whenever you do a search in Google for some term, it will also show in the sidebar notes in your Evernote that match that search.
Yep. Yeah, but that doesn't benefit other people.
Right. Good point. Good point.
What are
yeah,
you?
That's for me only.
What are you hiding from us? What are you keeping back from the world in your Evernote
I'm such
stack?
a secret person.
He's got a folder on Avdi. He's got a folder on Chuck. He's got an entire separate hard drive.
Now that you've got your blog working again, you just need to write a script to dump everything from Evernote into it.
Dump it all up there. Here's my last 10 years of my brain.
You won't need that plugin anymore.
Right. Good point.
I mean, but seriously, like, one of the blog posts that I wrote that was literally just like, okay, I keep making the same stupid mistake with new projects, and so I'm just going to write down the database cleaner configuration that actually works. And that, I think, is like my most popular blog post ever.
That's a really, really good idea.
Because it's the one blog post that, you know, years later, people pop in and say, hey, thanks for this. I just spent 3 hours banging my head against this, and then I found your blog post, you know, over and over and over again. So not any of the like big idea blog posts, but just, you know, the database.
Oh my God. You know, it's funny. I definitely used that blog post when we were configuring the new.
Dang it, now another dirty little secret's out. We're not writing our blogs for you, we're writing them for us.
Yep.
So I have one more thing that I want to bring up, and this kind of came to light a little bit while we were talking before. Somebody mentioned a narrative arc. And then looking at your different cartoons, and, you know, this is very much how the Oatmeal does its thing. How easy do you find it to break down these code or web development concepts into these stories or narratives that you put together in these cartoons?
You know, it's funny. It's actually the part that I enjoy the most. Like, I really like that exercise of taking something complex and intimidating and kind of being forced to break it down and tell a story around it. But I find that it's easier to do as soon as I've learned the concept, because I still remember that gap. I still remember what was hard about it, and I remember what I had to kind of fix in my thinking to understand the right way to do it. So I find that, so for example, right now, if I had to, you know, recreate the blog post on, you know, how web apps work, I think I'd have a lot harder of a time now than I did when I drew it, you know, immediately after I understood it. So I love the process, but I think that it gets harder the further removed you are from the problem that you're trying to explain.
Interesting. I just, you know, especially on the freelancer show, they keep telling me, you know, for my email marketing and things like that, just tell a story, tell a story, tell a story, tell a story. People relate to stories, and I'm so bad at that.
What makes it hard for you?
I don't know, because I just understand it as a concept, and so creating a good story around it. Like, sometimes there are examples where I struggled with it or something, and I can tell that story, but a lot of times it's just this concept, and I understand the concept, but I can't really, I have trouble, creating a story or a narrative where people really come to understand it.
Okay, so I'm going to tell you 3 tricks. Are you ready?
Yes.
Awesome.
Okay. So trick number 1, I always write the opener first, no matter what. Like if I don't have a really awesome first sentence, like that lead sentence, everything else is a lot harder. So I think it's a lot easier if you can think of that very first sentence and just work on making that sentence just the strongest, most interesting lead that you can. That's like the first one. The second one is I think in headlines. So every single time I write a post or cartoon or anything, I think of what the title is going to be and I work on that. And I kind of base everything else off of that title. And so if you can't kind of tell the story in just the title, it's the actual writing of the story is probably going to be a lot harder. And then the third thing is when you're actually telling the story, like when I did How Web Apps Work, that was based on, what is it that I wanted to learn most about web apps? And for me, the thing that I wanted to understand back when, I didn't know what Rails was and how it worked, was I wanted to understand how all the pieces fit together. Like that was always a thing that just burned inside me. It was just like, how are all the pieces coming together to see what I'm seeing? Like that was the big mystery. And so if you're thinking about, what story you want to write, I would ask myself, what is the mystery? What is like the huge question that this concept is solving? And every concept, of course, the goal is to explain a mystery, right? There's this concept of XYZ, and the goal is to explain this thing that no one understood until they understood the concept. So understanding what that mystery is, what that big kind of burning question is, and writing to explain what the question is and then how to answer it and then why answering it is important. I think that's how you'd write a story.
Your point number 2 about how you think in headlines, I've recently used that one to pretty good effect. I have a project list I always keep where, as I have ideas, I'll go dump them in there as I work on this someday. And I used to write these detailed things, basically just whatever I could think up about a given project, I would dump in there. So it got to the point where my project list was so huge and convoluted that I found it intimidating, so I just quit opening it. Which turns out to be not that useful in a project list. And so recently I redid it where I went through and I only allow myself a single line, basically the headline, like you say, for a project. And I can only put in that. I allow one level of nesting, but only for the cases like this thing is a series and here would be the individual parts in it, or this thing is huge, here's how I would break it down into manageable chunks. That's like it. And I never allow myself to nest more than one deep. And again, everything is just one line. And now I love my project list and I go in it all the time and I'm like, I'll do this today or whatever, because it's so less intimidating.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, this has been a terrific discussion, but I think we probably better get to the picks.
Let's do it.
All right. David, do you want to start us with picks?
Sure. I've just got one quick one today, and that is the CompSci Fact account on Twitter. That's at CompSci, SCI, Fact. It's just kind of a fun, we talked earlier at the top of the show about how math and programming seem to be inextricably related. And I started following CompSci Fact just because they tweeted a really interesting concept, which is that programmers in computer science really should stop worrying about formal mathematical concepts like groups and rings and total orders, and should instead concentrate on posets and monoids. And I didn't know what a poset or a monoid was, at least by those names. And I went up and spent several hours on Wikipedia just researching what those things were. And I was like, wow, a poset is a partially ordered set. And, it's where two things in the set have no sorting relationship to each other. You cannot sort because they're just, one's apples and one's oranges. You just can't organize them. And we deal with them all the time. And we habitually turn them into total order or tosets or totally ordered sets just as conveniences to make them fit our mathematical way of thinking. But if we can drop back and think about them in posets, then it's much more valuable. And that was a long digression onto one tweet from CompSci Fact. There's lots of other fun things in there, weird history facts, like the fact that Haskell didn't actually like the name Haskell and that sort of thing. Didn't like his own name particularly much. That sort of stuff. So Comp Sci Fact, it's a fun account on Twitter. You should follow it and you'll learn something. It'll be fun. That's my pick.
It looks like Avdi looked it up while you were talking about it, too, because he retweeted something they just said.
Excellent.
Total coincidence.
And a mono is something you can get on Amazon, right?
You know what? I've already made a mono joke on the show, so.
Jeez. All right, James, what are your picks?
I've got two. For a tech pick, there is a great blog post by Matt Sadler called Ruby 2.1 in Detail, and it covers all the changes in Ruby 2.1, which is great. Some of them I knew, and some of them I didn't know, so if you want to know everything that's new in Ruby 2.1, this is one-stop shopping to pick all that up, which is great. And then for a fun thing, my wife and I recently watched the first season of Orphan Black. And I thought it was just a great show. It's free on Amazon Prime right now, so a good way to pick it up. If you liked Dollhouse at all, I was a fan of Dollhouse. I would maybe even argue this is Dollhouse done better. In that the lead character is playing all these different roles, and the lead character is playing other characters playing other different roles. It's surprisingly involved, and she does it really well. She's got a great range, so definitely worth checking out.
Yeah, I've heard great things about that show, but I haven't actually seen it yet.
It's worth it.
Awesome. Avdi, what are your picks?
Alrighty. Well, I thought I'd start out with a coding pick, and this is one of those libraries that I've used to good effect for a long time, and it's just one of those things that's kind of always there for me, and so I didn't even think about it to pick it. But Nick Gauthier has a library called Domino, and it's basically a helper for tests that use Capybara, and it gives you a way to very quickly and easily define little classes that represent the things on the page. And so you can then interact. You can then basically, like, if I have a list of episodes on a page, I can write like an episode summary class, and I can then do a find all episode summaries, and then I can poke them for their attributes, and I can very easily write, like, here's how you find the title of an episode, and then I can make that an attribute of the class just using CSS selectors. And so it basically, it's a great way to organize all the millions of little Capybara helper methods that I might otherwise write into a more of a sane setup. I've been using it for a long time, and thought I should probably give some credit there, because I don't think that it's very well known. If it is, great. If not, I hope it becomes more known. So that's one. Another quick technical pick. I realized I needed a nice big network attached storage device recently because I was running out of space on my drives with all the video work that I do now. And so I asked the good folks on Parley, and they gave me some great advice, and I wound up going with a Synology DS214 Plus, which is a dual bay sort of home office network attached storage, and I got a pair of 2 terabyte Western Digital Reds to go in it. And so far, I'm quite impressed with it. I'm a little reticent to, fully pick something that I just started using, but it certainly seemed to be the crowd favorite, at least that brand. And I've been really impressed with like the setup and the software that they put on it. Very, very easy to use and set up. So hopefully that'll take care of my storage needs for a long time. And if it turns out to be a bad pick, I'll let you know, but I have high hopes. On the not so coding front, I recently got to the point with running that I decided that I could maybe start doing a little running with the younger children. So I got a jogging stroller, a dual jogging stroller, and just took it out yesterday. Took the 2 little girls out in it yesterday and just jogged around the neighborhood to get used to it. Pulled back up to the house, and as soon as I stopped, our toddler burst into tears and fought me and would not let me unbuckle her from the jogging stroller. And apparently this morning, my wife tells me this morning, she was trying to unfold it and get herself into it. So yeah, so that definitely went over well. It's definitely it's going to take some getting used to, jogging with while pushing 2 other people, but it seems like it's totally worth it. For the record, the model that I got based on a lot of recommendations was a Bob Revolution Pro dually stroller. yeah, so I guess the main pick there is just jogging with your kids.
Nice. Wait, how is a jogging stroller different from a regular stroller?
I don't know all the details, but like the most obvious thing is that it has big wheels. It also has a lockable front wheel, so it's a 3-wheel stroller, 2 big wheels in the back, 1 big wheel in the front, and the front wheel is lockable, so when you're jogging, you just lock it straight ahead. It doesn't swivel. There are a few other little things. It's got a suspension to it. This model actually has a squeeze brake for when you're going down hills, so it's not like, pulling away from you, stuff like that. But
cool.
Mainly the big wheels.
Nice.
Big wheels turn out to be the key. Anybody in a wheelchair can tell you, because if you don't have those big wheels and you're moving at speed and then you hit just a big enough bump, you just go from whatever speed you're moving to 0 instantly. Not good.
Well, and depending on how you're attached to your chair, you might wind up going from whatever speed you're going to flying through the air.
I've done that. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So, Avdi, I can't take credit for this joke, but one of the most fun things you can do with that stroller is put one child in it and then sprint frantically around the neighborhood. and just watch everyone's reaction.
Wait, what? I missed something there.
Leave one seat empty and then sprint around the neighborhood like you're looking for the lost child.
All right, that's it for me.
All right. Well, I've got a couple of picks here. The first one is Avdi's pick for the Synology thing reminded me. I just have a little iOmega hard drive connected to the network here, and I'd forgotten that I'd put all my wife's pictures on there. And when I was setting up another machine for her, I wound up blowing away the only machine that actually had her pictures on it besides that.
Oh.
And so I was frantically looking everywhere to see if I had another copy, and yeah, so I'm not going to die. I'll just let everybody know. I found them there on that network drive in like 6 different places. I think I was pretty paranoid when I put them on there. But anyway, so, I guess that's not really a pick other than not dying. I've started watching a show on Netflix called Warehouse 13. It's on the Sci-Fi Channel.
Oh, yeah.
It's kind of a fun show. It's not my most favoriteest show I've ever seen, but I've been enjoying it. So I've watched the first season and 1 or 2 in the second season, and it's kind of fun. So I'm going to pick that. And Saron, what are your picks?
Sure. I have a few. They're all books, and I don't think that any of them are programming related, so sorry about that part. But one is a book called The Path Redefined, and it's the story of this incredible entrepreneur, Lauren Malin Bias, and she started like a winery when she was 19 and sold it. And then she started this marketing firm, and then she has like a fund, and she's an angel investor investing in tech startups now. And she's like 28 and a single mom. So she's kind of like my new hero. And so I really, really love the book. I'm a huge fan of like business profiles and business books. And I feel like this is one of the few where, the entrepreneur actually writes it well, because most books are not well written. But then she also has like really applicable advice to you and your life and how you can, be a better business person. And even if you're not, how to be a better, advocate for yourself. So I thought it was like surprisingly applicable in terms of like improving your own life. So that's my first one. A second one that I just finished reading, that actually my fiance made me read this book. I didn't want to read it, but I'm glad that I did. It's called The Millionaire Next Door. It's a little bit older. I think it's written in 1995, but it was incredible. It was like this hugely data-driven book about who the millionaires in America are and how they're not like the flashy, high consumption people that you probably think. They don't all drive incredibly, fancy vehicles. And they're actually very, very price sensitive. They budget a lot. And it just kind of gave me a new perspective on money and savings and all that. So yeah, I highly recommend that. And then my last one, which is more of, it's a book that I read, but in general, this weekend, I went to Barnes & Noble's and I rediscovered the awesomeness of optical illusions. And so I think I got like 3 books of just like all kinds of optical illusions. And now I'm obsessed with drawing the Penrose Triangle, which I actually realized is The Verge's logo. So my notebooks looks like I'm in love with The Verge.
Nice.
But yeah, they're just so much fun, and like seeing, what you can do with art and how it can totally screw with your head is just awesome. So I recommend everyone go to Barnes & Noble's this weekend and just look at Optical Illusion books.
Very nice. I read The Millionaire Mind, which is another book by Thomas Stanley, and it was also really good. So,
yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for coming. We really appreciate you coming and kind of blowing our minds.
No problem. Anytime you need your minds blown, just let me know.
All right.
Awesome. Thank you, Saron.
No problem. Thank you so much for having me. It was a lot of fun.
All right. Well, real quick, we have a couple of reminders. We are reading Refactoring Ruby Edition for our book club book. So keep an eye out for that episode. Start reading the book now. The other one is if you want the tickets to Midwest, what is it, midwest.io?
Yes.
Then make sure that you're getting those tweets out there. You need to put your favorite Ruby Rogues episode in there, the hashtag RRMidwest, and just tell them thanks for giving away a ticket on the show, and we'll get that announced here within the next few weeks, the winner. So other than that, I don't think we have anything else, so thanks for listening. We'll catch y'all next week. This episode is sponsored by CodeShip. CodeShip is a hosted continuous deployment service that just works. Set up continuous integration in a few steps and automatically deploy when all your tests have passed. CodeShip has great support for a lot of languages and test frameworks. It integrates with GitHub and Bitbucket and lets you deploy cloud services like Heroku, AWS, Nojitsu, Google App Engine, or your own servers. Start with their free plan. Setup only takes 3 minutes. CodeShip, continuous deployment made simple. A special thanks to honeybadger.io for sponsoring Ruby Rogues. They do exception monitoring, uptime, and performance metrics and are an active part of the Ruby community. Hosting and bandwidth provided by the Blue Box Group. Check them out at bluebox.net. Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CacheFly.com to learn more. Would you like to join a conversation with the Rogues and their guests? Want to support the show? We have a forum that allows you to join the conversation and support the show at the same time. You can sign up at rubyrogues.com/parlay.